What would you do if you found them like that, huddled together in the smoking ruins, their eyes wide with terror and something else, something that looked too much like hope? Marcus Chen's hands were still shaking from the firefight, his rifle warm against his chest, when he stumbled through the collapsed wall of what had once been a settlement on Kepler for to be and saw them. 3 small figures pressed against the cooling body of their mother, her silver skin already fading to ash gray in death, and standing protectively over them. A young woman with platinum hair and pointed ears, her eyes burning with a fierce mixture of grief and defiance as she raised a makeshift weapon toward him with trembling hands. "Stay back," she hissed, her voice breaking, and Marcus could see she was barely holding it together. This beautiful creature, who looked so heartbreakingly human, except for those delicate, pointed ears and the faint luminescent glow of her skin, wearing tactical pants torn at the knees and a fitted jacket stained with dust and blood that wasn't hers. He should have kept moving, should have regrouped with his unit, should have reported the Zarek raid and moved on. But something in her eyes stopped him cold, something in the way the smallest cub, couldn't have been more than 5 in human years, was clutching her leg and crying softly. Marcus slowly lowered his weapon, raising his empty hands. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly, and she laughed, a broken sound. "That's what they said," she whispered, gesturing to the destruction around them. The scattered bodies, the burning homes. And Marcus felt something twist in his chest because he knew who she meant. Knew that human raiders had done this, his own species. The ones he'd been chasing for 3 days across this god-forsaken moon. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words felt pathetically inadequate. But her weapon lowered slightly, her amber eyes studying his face with an intensity that made him feel naked, exposed. "Your sorrow means nothing to us, human," she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge, replaced by exhaustion so profound he could feel it from where he stood. "I'm Sera," she added after a moment, as if the words were pulled from her against her will. "These are my siblings, Kira, Tomas, and Fen." She gestured to the 3 cubs, the oldest maybe 10, the youngest still clutching a stuffed creature that had seen better days. Marcus introduced himself, his eyes drifting to the fallen mother, her face peaceful despite the violence of her death. A plasma burned through her chest. "She tried to protect us," Sera said softly, following his gaze. "She always did." The way she said it made Marcus wonder how many times before this they'd needed protecting, how many times her mother had stood between them and danger. "You need to leave here," he said, scanning the darkening sky, knowing the raiders might return, knowing his own unit would arrive soon with questions he didn't want to answer. "Where would we go?" Sera asked, and the hopelessness in her voice was worse than her earlier anger. "Our settlement is gone, our people are scattered or dead. And I have 3 children who can barely walk a mile without rest." She sank down beside her siblings, and Marcus saw how young she really was, maybe 22, 23, thrust into a role she'd never asked for, trying to be strong when everything had fallen apart. He knelt beside them, ignoring the tactical voice in his head screaming about mission parameters and non-interference protocols, and looked at the cubs properly, their huge eyes reflecting the firelight, their small bodies shivering despite the warm night. Fen, the smallest, was looking at him with such innocent trust it made his heart ache. And before he could stop himself, he was pulling off his jacket and wrapping it around the child, who snuggled into the warmth with a soft coo that sounded almost like a purr. "Thank you," Sera whispered, and when their eyes met, Marcus felt something shift, some fundamental alignment of purpose he couldn't explain. "I'm staying," he said, and she blinked at him in confusion. "What?" "I'm staying," he repeated, setting down his rifle. "Until we figure this out, until you're safe, I'm not leaving." Sera stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You don't even know us. We're nothing to you. Why would you throw away your mission, your unit, your entire life, for strangers?" Marcus looked at the cubs, at their mother's body, at the ruins of a peaceful settlement destroyed by greed and cruelty, and felt something crystallize inside him. "Because someone has to," he said simply. "Because I'm tired of being part of a species that does this and walks away. Because those kids deserve better than to die out here alone. And because," he met her eyes again, held her gaze, "because you shouldn't have to carry this by yourself." The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of distant fires and Fen's soft breathing. And then Sera did something unexpected. She started crying, real tears sliding down her luminescent cheeks. her shoulders shaking with the force of emotions she'd clearly been holding back since the attack. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not strong like she was. I'm not brave like she was. I'm just me, and they need so much more than I can give them." Marcus moved closer, not touching, but present, solid. "You stood over them with a weapon you barely knew how to use, facing down an armed soldier to protect them," he said. "That's the definition of brave, Sera. Trust me. I know brave when I see it." She looked up at him through her tears, and he saw something fragile and precious forming between them. Recognition, understanding, the beginning of trust. "We need to bury her," Sera said finally, looking at her mother. "Before we do anything else, she deserves that much." Marcus nodded and stood, offering his hand to help her up, and when she took it, her skin was warm and soft, and hummed with that strange luminescence her people possessed. And he felt a jolt of connection so strong it was almost electric. They buried Sera's mother as the twin moons rose, the cubs singing a haunting melody in their language that made the hair on Marcus's arms stand up. And Sera placed a small crystal on the grave that glowed with captured starlight, a tradition of her people he didn't understand, but respected deeply. When it was done, they sat in the ruins of what had been Sera's childhood home, and she told him about her people, the Luminari, how they'd come to this moon seeking peace after their homeworld was destroyed in a war they hadn't started, how they'd built this settlement with their own hands, how her mother had been their leader, wise and kind and completely irreplaceable. "She used to say that every species has a choice," Sera murmured, watching the cubs sleep in a nest of blankets Marcus had pulled from his pack. "Between fear and love, between violence and compassion, every moment of every day, we choose what we become." She turned to Marcus. "What are you choosing, really, by staying? Because once your people find you here, there will be consequences. You know that, right?" Marcus had already considered this, had already accepted it. "I'm choosing to be someone I can live with," he said. "I've spent 3 years following orders, hunting targets, asking questions later. And where has it gotten me? Standing in the ashes of innocent lives, wondering when I became the villain in someone else's story." Sera reached out hesitantly and took his hand, and the gesture felt monumental, a bridge across species, across everything that should have kept them apart. "Then I choose to trust you," she said. "Ancestors help me. I choose to believe that not all humans are the same, that you're different, that maybe together we can keep them safe." The first 3 days were the hardest, moving carefully through the wilderness, avoiding both the raiders and Marcus's own unit, heading toward the northern mountains, where Sera had heard rumors of other Luminari survivors gathering. The cubs were resilient but young, needing frequent rests, and Marcus found himself carrying Fen on his shoulders more often than not, the little one's hands twisted in his hair, babbling to him in a mix of Luminari and broken standard that made him smile despite their circumstances. Sera was a constant revelation, fierce when danger threatened, tender with her siblings, and increasingly open with Marcus as the hours passed. She had a habit of humming while she walked, old songs her mother had taught her, and she could identify edible plants with a glance, keeping them fed when their rations ran low. "You're good at this," Marcus told her on the 3rd night, watching her start a virtually smokeless fire using techniques he'd never seen. She glanced up, a slight smile playing at her lips. "My mother believed in practical education," she said. "Music, art, philosophy, yes, but also survival, because beauty means nothing if you're too dead to appreciate it." He laughed, and she looked pleased, like making him laugh was a small victory. That night, after the cubs were asleep, they sat close to the fire, and Sera asked him about Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests she'd only seen in broadcasts, about the diversity of human culture that seemed so impossibly rich compared to her small settlement. "It sounds beautiful," she said wistfully. "Complicated and messy, but beautiful. I wish," she trailed off, but Marcus knew what she wasn't saying, that she wished the worst of humanity hadn't found her people first. That first contact had been different, gentler. "Not all of us are raiders and killers," he said quietly. "Most of us are just trying to get by, trying to find meaning, trying to love and be loved, just like anyone else." Sera looked at him with those luminous amber eyes. "I'm beginning to see that," she said softly. And when she leaned her head against his shoulder, exhausted, trusting, Marcus felt something in his chest expand. Something dangerous and wonderful and completely unexpected. On the 5th day, they found the refugee camp, about 200 Luminari hidden in a network of caves, led by an elder named Crush, who regarded Marcus with deep suspicion until Sera stepped forward and vouched for him, telling their story to the assembled crowd in her own language, her voice growing stronger and more confident as she spoke. Marcus didn't understand the words, but he felt the shift in mood, saw the way people looked at him differently, with curiosity instead of fear, with cautious hope instead of hatred. Crush approached him afterward, an old male with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much. "The daughter of Lyra speaks highly of you, human," he said, in careful standard. "She says you chose honor when you could have chosen safety, that you carried her youngest sibling on your shoulders for 15 miles without complaint, that you stand between her family and harm as if they were your own." He paused, studying Marcus intently. Why? It was the same question Sera had asked, and Marcus gave the same answer. "Because someone has to, because I want to be part of the solution, not the problem." Crush nodded slowly. "You may stay, for now. But know this, human, if you betray that trust, if you bring harm to these people, there will be nowhere in this galaxy you can hide from my vengeance." Marcus believed him completely and said so, which seemed to satisfy the elder. The camp was crowded, but organized. Luminari families sharing space with quiet dignity. Children playing games that seemed universal. Adults working together to build something new from the ashes of what they'd lost. Marcus found himself welcomed cautiously at first, then with growing warmth as the cubs talked excitedly about the human who'd saved them, who'd carried them, who'd made Sera smile again. He helped where he could, using his military engineering skills to improve their water filtration system, teaching self-defense techniques to those who wanted to learn, sharing what he knew about human tactics so they could better avoid detection. But mostly, he spent time with Sera and her siblings, becoming part of their small family in ways that felt natural and right. Reading stories to the cubs in the evening, helping Sera cook meals over their small fire, talking late into the night about everything and nothing, while the stars wheeled overhead. "I've been thinking," Sera said one evening, about 2 weeks after they'd arrived at the camp. The two of them sitting on a cliff edge overlooking the valley while the cubs played nearby under Crush's watchful eye. "About what happens next, about the future." Marcus waited, his heart beating faster, sensing something important coming. "My people can't stay hidden forever," she continued. "Eventually, we'll be found, by raiders, or by the colonial authority, or by someone. And when that happens, we need allies, we need voices speaking for us in human space. We need," she turned to him, "we need bridges, Marcus, between your people and mine, and I hope, that maybe we could be that bridge." He understood what she was really asking, whether his commitment was temporary or something more, whether he saw a future beyond just keeping them safe. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Not tomorrow, not next month, not when this gets complicated. Which it will. I'm here, Sera, for as long as you'll have me." Her smile was radiant, transforming her face from beautiful to absolutely breathtaking. And when she took his hand, lacing her fingers through his, the gesture felt like a promise, like the beginning of something. Neither of them fully understood, but both wanted desperately to explore. The raiders came back. On a cold morning for weeks after, Marcus had first knelt beside the cubs and changed his life forever. A scouting party tracking Luminari energy signatures. A dozen armed humans with hate in their eyes and greed in their hearts. The alarm went up just after dawn, and Marcus felt his blood turn to ice, knowing what was coming, knowing he'd have to face his own species in defense of another. Crush organized the defense with military precision, sending the children and elderly deeper into the caves while fighters took up positions. But Marcus knew they were outgunned, outmatched, that this could end in massacre if he didn't try something desperate. "Let me talk to them," he said, and Sera grabbed his arm, fear bright in her eyes. "They'll kill you," she said. "You're a deserter now. They won't listen." "They might," he countered. "I know these types. I used to be one of them. And if I can make them see, really see what they're doing." Sera looked at him like she was memorizing his face, like she thought she might never see him again. And then she kissed him, quick and fierce and desperate, her lips soft and warm and tasting of hope. "Come back to me," she whispered. "You promised." "I promised," he agreed, and walked out to face his own people, The raider leader was exactly what Marcus expected. A scarred mercenary named Taggart, who he'd actually served with briefly years ago. A man who'd chosen profit over principle so long ago he'd forgotten there was ever a choice. Chen, Taggart said with a cruel smile when Marcus approached under a white flag. Heard you went native, didn't believe it till now. Marcus kept his expression neutral, his hands visible and empty. Turn around, Tag. There's nothing for you here. Taggart laughed. That's where you're wrong. The Luminari have biotech worth millions, crystals that store energy, medical knowledge that could revolutionize healthcare. And you want us to just walk away? I want you to stop killing innocent people for things that don't belong to you, Marcus said, his voice hardening. These are refugees, families, children. What happened to you? When did we become the monsters? Taggart's smile faded. The strong take what they want. That's how the universe works. You used to understand that. Marcus shook his head. I used to be a lot of things I'm not proud of. But I'm trying to be better. You could too. It's not too late. For a moment, just a moment. Something flickered in Taggart's eyes, something almost human. And Marcus thought he might actually get through. But then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. Kill him. Taggart ordered his men. Then burn the caves. Marcus dove for cover as plasma fire erupted, rolling behind a boulder as the world exploded into violence. And he realized with awful clarity that words had failed. That some people were too far gone to save. That sometimes the only choice was to fight. He returned fire, his shots precise and controlled, aiming for weapons and limbs rather than kill shots, still holding on to some thread of hope that this could end without more death. The Luminari joined the fight, their weapons less advanced, but their determination absolute. And Marcus saw Sera among them, her face set with fierce concentration as she laid down covering fire, protecting her people with the same courage her mother had shown. The battle was chaos, smoke and sound and the sharp ozone smell of plasma burns. And Marcus fought his way toward Taggart, knowing that if he could take down the leader, the others might break, might retreat. They faced each other across a rocky clearing, both breathing hard, both bleeding from minor wounds. And Taggart looked at him with something like pity. You're going to die for them, he said. For aliens, for freaks who aren't even human. You're throwing away everything. Marcus thought about Fenn's laughter, about Kira's shy smile, about Tomas's endless questions, about Sera's hand in his and the way she looked at him, like he was someone worth believing in. No, he said quietly. I'm finally living for something that matters. And then he moved, faster than Taggart expected, closing the distance and striking hard, using every trick he'd ever learned to disarm and disable, fighting with desperate precision. The fight was brutal and short, ending with Taggart on the ground, disarmed, defeated, and Marcus standing over him with a weapon he chose not to fire. Leave, Marcus said. Tell whoever sent you that the Luminari are under protection, that there are humans who won't stand by while you murder and steal, that this ends now. Taggart stared at him, then at the Luminari fighters surrounding them, and made the calculation, scrambling to his feet and retreating with his surviving raiders, bloodied and broken. The silence after they left was deafening, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the sound of relief, of survival. Marcus dropped his weapon and turned to find Sera running toward him. And then she was in his arms, holding him so tight he could barely breathe. And he realized he was shaking, adrenaline and fear and relief all crashing through him at once. You came back, she whispered against his chest. You came back to me, always, he promised, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Kresh approached them, his expression solemn. You have given us a great gift, Marcus Chen, the elder said. Not just victory today, but hope for tomorrow. Proof that humans and Luminari can stand together, can build something better than hatred and violence. He placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture of deep respect among the Luminari. You are one of us now, if you wish it, family. Protected and protecting, bound by choice rather than blood. Marcus looked at Sera, at her siblings gathering around them, at the people he'd fought for, and with, and felt something settle into place, like a puzzle piece finding its proper spot. I wish it, he said. More than anything, the weeks that followed were about healing and building, treating the wounded, strengthening their defenses, and sending messages to the colonial authority through secure channels Marcus still had access to, telling the truth about the Luminari, about the raiders, about what was really happening on Kepler for to be. Sera worked beside him, her political instincts sharp and her compassion genuine, becoming a leader her people needed. And Marcus watched her grow into her power with pride and something deeper, something that felt like love, though neither of them had said the word yet. They fell into rhythms together, morning walks to check the perimeter, evening meals with the cubs, who now called him brother in their language, nights talking about dreams and fears and possibilities. "Do you ever regret it?" Sera asked him one night, the two of them lying on a blanket under the stars, her head on his shoulder. "Staying? Giving up your old life?" Marcus considered the question seriously, thinking about his apartment on Earth he'd never see again, his military career that was effectively over, the simple path he'd been on before he knelt beside 3 terrified cubs and chose differently. "Not even for a second," he said. "This, you, them. It's the first time in my life I've felt like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Sera shifted, propping herself up to look down at him, her hair falling around them like a silver curtain, her eyes glowing softly in the darkness. "I love you," she said simply, the words falling between them like stars. "I know it's fast. I know it's complicated, but I do. I love you, Marcus Chen, and I needed you to know." His heart felt too big for his chest, threatening to burst with the force of what he felt. "I love you too," he said, reaching up to cup her face gently. "Probably from the moment you pointed that weapon at me with shaking hands and chose to protect your family even though you were terrified. Definitely. From the moment you trusted me enough to cry. Absolutely. From every moment since." She kissed him then, slow and deep and full of promise. And Marcus thought about all the choices that had led him here, all the moments he could have turned away, and thanked every star in the sky that he hadn't. 3 months after Marcus had knelt in the ashes and whispered, "I'm staying," a colonial authority ship landed with official representatives, drawn by his reports and the growing chorus of human voices demanding justice for the Luminari. Marcus stood beside Sera as they met the delegation, her hand in his, Kresh and the other leaders flanking them, and presented their case, a formal alliance between the Luminari refugees and their human allies, a demand for protection and recognition, a vision of what cooperation could look like. The negotiations took weeks, but Marcus had learned patience, had learned that some things worth having were worth fighting for slowly, with words and diplomacy instead of weapons. In the end, they won provisional colony status, protection from raiders, aid in rebuilding, and recognition of Luminari sovereignty over their settlement. It wasn't perfect. There would be challenges ahead, prejudice to overcome, but it was a beginning, a foundation to build on. On the day the papers were signed, Sera took Marcus back to the place where they'd met, the ruins of her old settlement, now marked with memorial stones for all who'd been lost. They stood before her mother's grave, and Sera spoke softly in her own language. Words Marcus had learned meant something like, "I hope I've made you proud. I hope you see that your sacrifice wasn't in vain. I hope you know that we survived. We're building something beautiful from the ashes. And it's because a human knelt beside your cubs and chose to stay." She placed a new crystal on the grave, this one glowing with the colors intertwined, Luminari silver and human blue. "She would have liked you," Sera told Marcus, tears streaming down her face. "She always said that family wasn't about blood. It was about who you'd stand beside when everything fell apart. And you stood beside us when you had every reason to walk away." Marcus pulled her close, holding her while she cried, and looked at the memorial stones, at the names of people he'd never known, but had tried to honor by protecting what they'd loved most. "I'm glad I stayed," he said quietly, and Sera laughed through her tears. "So am I," she whispered. "So am I." The settlement grew over the following year, Luminari and humans working side by side, building homes and schools and gardens, creating something new and beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. Fen started attending the new school, proudly telling everyone about his human brother, while Kira discovered a talent for engineering and Tomas became fascinated with xenobiology, studying the differences and similarities between their species. Sera became the official liaison between the Luminari and the colonial authority, her intelligence and compassion making her a natural diplomat, and Marcus worked as head of security, training a mixed force of Luminari and humans to protect what they'd built together. They moved into a small house on the edge of the settlement, not quite married by either of their culture's standards, but committed in every way that mattered, building a life together that felt like coming home. On quiet evenings, they'd sit on their porch with the cubs, watching the twin moons rise, and Marcus would remember that moment in the ruins, kneeling beside 3 terrified children and 1 fierce young woman, whispering, "I'm staying," and meaning it with his whole heart. It had been the easiest and hardest choice of his life, and he'd never regretted it, not when things got difficult, not when he was declared a deserter by Earth military, not when he faced down raiders and skeptics and all the forces that said humans and Luminari couldn't build something together. Because they had built it, were still building it, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of choosing love over fear, compassion over violence, hope over despair. Sera would catch him staring sometimes and ask what he was thinking, and he'd pull her close and say, "Just that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," and she'd smile that radiant smile and kiss him and whisper, "Me too. Always me too." And in those moments, Marcus knew that kneeling in the ashes and choosing to stay hadn't just saved the cubs, hadn't just saved Sera, it had saved him too, had given him purpose and family and love and a future worth fighting for. And he'd spend every day of his life grateful that when the moment came, when everything hung in the balance, he'd made the choice that mattered. The choice to stay, to fight, to love, to become someone worth being. And that had made all the difference.